I've been making stuff for a really long time, and so it was thrilling that Rusty invited me here to talk to people who are still making stuff. Bravo. Yesterday I was on a plane, and I was sitting next to this guy, and he had on this extraordinary ring. There were stones on it and filigree and metal, and he's wearing it on his middle finger, and I turned to him and I say, "That's a really cool ring." And he tells me how it got made, and he says, "It's my wedding ring." I say, "How can it be your wedding ring? You're wearing it on the wrong finger." And he shrugged and he said, "Well, I married the wrong woman." And I stole that from my friend Zig. But I tell it to you because there has been a really, really significant shift in what it means to make something. And some parts of it have gotten way easier than ever before, and other parts have gotten almost impossible. And what I want to do today is not talk about me and the stuff I've been making through my career, but spend almost the entire time talking to you guys and answering your questions about which part of your business is hard. And I want to, before we launch into that, I want to preface it with two things. The first one is understanding how to deal with a generous skeptic. Now, you will run into skeptics all the time. And there are two kinds of skeptics when you tell them about your business. They're your in-laws, and these are the skeptics who want you to get a job at Citibank. These people need to be shunned. They need to be avoided. There's the generous skeptic, though, and the generous skeptic is the person who is willing to spend the time to think deeply about what's ahead for you and what's going to be difficult. And there are two ways to deal with a generous skeptic. Three. The worst way is to listen to them and give up. So we're going to leave that part aside. But there are two other ways. The second way is to fight back against that person and to confuse that person with your mother-in-law and to deny what that person is saying and to not listen to them, because after all, every story of successful people who make stuff is filled with those successful people being bullheaded enough to actually make it. But the third way to deal with them, which is the correct way to deal with them, which is the useful way to deal with them, is to spend the time to completely understand their point of view, to act as if you agree with their skepticism and explore it all the way to the bottom, and then make your own decision about what you're going to do with that skepticism. Because if you can put their hat on for a few minutes and see what they are seeing that you've been blinded to because you're so busy building what you're building, you're going to get something out of it. So I'm here as the designated generous skeptic today to try to help you think about which woman you married and whether it's the right one or the wrong one when you think about the assumptions you are making about your business. So now let me get to the assumptions part. The long tail isn't just a clever title for a book. It is really a fundamental shift in everything that's involved in making stuff. Number one, the average age of the people in this room is under 30. 30 years ago, people under 30 didn't start companies where they made stuff. That the idea that you could come up with an idea, make a Kickstarter, raise $50,000, $100,000, the idea that you could use your reputation and your blog and your Twitter account to start a temporary tattoo business, the idea that you could make a thing without having a factory is brand new. That it is, I published a book a year ago that weighs 17 pounds and is 800 pages long, and we did the whole book in 90 days. I never met the people who printed it. I didn't, the woman who helped me edit it lives 12,000 miles away. I mean, I can go down this long list of impossible things that enabled me to make something. Now, let's acknowledge that it was easy to do it compared to what I would have had to do 20 years ago. So a whole bunch of what you do just got way easier. But what got harder? What got harder is when there's infinite shelf space, getting shelf space isn't worth very much, is it? And when there aren't 100,000 books being published every year, but 1 million, when there aren't 2 Kickstarters being launched every day, but 2 Kickstarters being launched every couple of minutes, when you go down the list of all the infinity that you have to deal with, please understand the thing that is hard is not making. The thing that is hard is getting people to understand you have something worth buying. And that the future is going to belong to people who make stuff that A, is amazing enough and wonderful enough and tactical enough that people can't help but talk about it, right? This is the point where I interject the rhetorical question. The first guy with a fax machine, what exactly did he do with it? And you'll think about that for a couple minutes, I hope. But built into the fax machine's design is the idea that fax machines work better if the people you know also have fax machines. And if you're not designing your product with the same mindset, people aren't going to talk about it. And then the second part, which is the critical part and the part you can start right now, is to use social media in the way that social media actually works properly, which is not yelling at people and calling attention to yourself and using it as a free alternative to television, but in fact, earning permission and trust. Because if you are a maker who has permission to talk to your audience and they trust you when you tell them what your thing does, you've just done the hard part. So what I want to do now is riskily leap forward and say, what's hard for you? Where are you stuck? What's in the way between where you are right now and where you want to go? And let's talk about it. Wait a second. We're going to do this.
Okay. I'll stand up. My name's Rebecca. I'm a home textile designer, and I have a line of home products and pillows. And I launched my line this year, and I've been really lucky that it's been well received. And my big problem is now scaling up and starting something that I started with my money and my savings, and how, some of it I've been like, if I get a big order, I get them to pay up front half of it. But financially, there's so much opportunity, but where do I go? Like, what options are there?
Yeah, great place for us to start. Thank you for being brave. A couple quick questions, okay? Are you trying to sell one pillow at a time, or are you trying to sell wholesale? Wholesale. And the perfect wholesale customer is who, if you could have anybody? Retailers. Okay. So the model that you've embraced, that you've married, is this, that there are high-end retailers, and that means retailers who sell to people who have extra money to spend, who are always looking for something new. And you have something new that's also beautiful. And your hope is that they will take a risk on you, give you some of their valuable shelf space, and then a customer who has never heard of you will come in, see that beautiful thing you make, fall in love with it, buy it, and then they'll reorder more, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with that model, but that is the model of 1957. It still works, but it is not the model of the future, because there's some real challenges there. Challenge number one is the boutiques are interested in you partly because you're incredibly talented and your stuff is great, but also partly because they can't sell what they sold last year because they're in the business of selling the new thing. So being in a business where your customers are always looking for the new thing is a little bit of a challenge, because you can't rely on having this backbone of reorders, right? So, if you're J.D. Salinger, the fact that Catcher in the Rye still sells 2 million copies a year, he's not dead, he's just hiding, sells 2 million copies a year is a really good thing, because it's not going to go away. That doesn't happen in your business the way it happens in a different business. You have a couple challenges here. Challenge number one is you need the maximum number of these high-end boutiques to be aware of you and to trust you, so that you don't have to spend an enormous amount of time contacting them every time you do that. So in fact, you think you're in the textile business, but you're actually a publisher of ideas. And you need these people to subscribe to your ideas. So they look forward once a week or once a month or once a day, hearing from you something that other people aren't going to be able to hear from you, and that you earn that attention. If you invest time and effort, you will earn that attention. So right now you have, 4 of those people, 40 of those people, whatever number. But as that number goes up and you take care of them, you will learn from them, they will learn from you, and that partnership will grow. Does that make sense? And the second half of it, you asked a totally different question, which is what are the tactics of bootstrapping this business? I wrote a book, and I'm offering it for free. I don't publicize it, it's free, but you can go read it, called The Bootstrapper's Bible. And just Google Bootstrapper's Bible and you'll find it. Running a business with other people's money, where the other people are your customers, is one of the best ways in the world to run a business, because then you get to make all the decisions. And there isn't a mixed motivation problem, right? So when you read the Bootstrapper's Bible, I hope you'll see a whole bunch of ways that you can use your customers' money to grow forward, and I'll just leave the second half at that. Thank you for getting us started. Yes, sir.
So we started a photo booth rental business in 2009, and it's been going really well, but we've gotten into...
A phone booth.
Photo booth.
Okay, good.
Photo booth. Sorry.
Phone booths,
no,
that would be tough.
No telephones, just a photo booth.
Photo booth, okay.
So it's been going well, but we have two, we rent them regularly, and it's nice. And we've used it to bankroll what we think has higher potential, which is online selling of paper goods that my wife custom designs. And they're tremendous. One side, we have a potential business that's successful, and it's able to fund our other business that we think has more potential, but we're kind of letting it glide. So how do we divide that, I guess?
This is a very common thing. You know, I was on the edge of bankruptcy for more than 10 years running my business, and there was always this notion that if I was surviving, I was getting closer to succeeding. And so you would figure out which cows you could milk to pay for the stuff you wanted to grow. Strategically, it's a real challenge to do that because you only have a limited amount of pure, unadulterated, positive energy. And if you're starting to spread it in different places, you've got trouble. So my general suggestion is the following. One, figure out how big the first business is when it's the right size. And almost every business has a right size. For example, before Tony Hsieh came along, if you owned a shoe store, we could all visualize the right size for a shoe store. A shoe store should not be a 100-square-foot boutique. A shoe store should not be Macy's. A shoe store should not have 40 branches. We know what the right size for a shoe store is. It's evolved. So when you think about this photo booth company, if you put more effort into it, what does the curve like? Is the effort rewarded really handsomely because the curve's steep at that point? Or is it going to be wasted incremental effort? Because the goal, and this is a key definition for everyone in the room, is to understand the difference between a freelancer and an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs build businesses bigger than themselves. Entrepreneurs build businesses that make money when they sleep. So your goal as an entrepreneur in the photo booth business is to get it to the point where you can afford to hire somebody who runs the business, right? Because at that point, because we don't need your particular brilliance in the photo booth business anymore. You just need to push it far enough that as an entrepreneur, you're making money from the business without working on it. Until that moment comes, you're actually a freelancer. You are hiring yourself to do a job because you're the cheapest person in the room. And the challenge that freelancers have, and I was one for a really long time and I am one again, is that freelancers are panicked because we never know where the next gig is going to come from. So when we have the choice to hire ourselves, we do because we're cheap. And the problem when you're hiring yourself is you're not spending any time building the next business. You're not spending any time inventing the next thing. So you have to figure out how to discipline yourself because the answer of I will stay up later is not a valid answer. Right? The answer of I will work more hours is not a valid answer. The valid answer is either I'm a freelancer, I hire myself, and that's the end of the story. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just keep raising your rates. Or I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm here to build a business bigger than me. So if the two of you said, we're going to make it so this photo booth rental thing is self-sustaining and paying us a profit by February, or we're going to shut it down, you would treat the business differently. And if you get to February and it's still a freelance business, shut it down and go bootstrap the business you believe in. On the other hand, if you can make it into a real business that pays you owner's dividends and runs itself, go do that. Because now you have a cash flow that you can apply to the next part of your business. Do you see the distinction? Right? I'm basically pushing you not to fib to yourself about how you're spending your time. Because you can find someone actually cheaper than you to run the photo booth business because you have particular talents that you ought to be investing in this thing you truly believe in.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I have a robotic and kinetic furniture company. And know.
I'm in Brooklyn. The time zone issue is a real problem for me. Just go slow when you tell me these new ideas.
Okay, so
what?
we do furniture that moves.
Furniture that moves.
Right, so like from levitating tables, robotic chandeliers that respond to things that happen in the room.
Okay.
Like this. So this means that we are, like you said, in some ways, freelancers because they're high end, and we're kind of service still. We wait for an order, and then we fulfill. So to make money when we sleep, we are coming out with a new product, which is for more mass market. Now, the question is, how do we deal with, is this like a brand diluting thing? Should we have a different company? We kind of are starting to get a name for ourselves as like a functional art company.
Yeah.
But this thing is going to be accessible for everyone.
Right.
So how do we deal with that?
This is great question. All right. So what is a brand? A brand is not a logo. A brand is not a name. A brand is a series of expectations that people have based on the promises they think you have made. Right? So I could come up with sketches for a new kind of sneaker. It would have no brand. But if I told you Nike is opening a coffee shop, you could visualize what it would be like. No caffeine-free beverages, right? I mean, like, it stands for something in your head. So the challenge when you try to launch something new is you have made a bunch of promises to a tiny group of people, and the vast majority of people in the world have no idea who you are. Now you're going to try to present yourself to a large number of strangers and say, this is who we are, this is the promise we make. It's like wearing a new set of clothes. What would you wear to go to the bank to get a loan? What would you wear to go to a singles bar to get a date? You need to think about, what does that stranger, whether it's a retailer or the end consumer, need to hear in the promises you make, right? That gets them to say, oh, this is for me. Now, one thing you could say to them is, we used to be unaffordable. We used to be just for billionaires. We used to be bespoke. Now, lucky you can get what Bill Gates spent a fortune for less. That's a story. It leads to a brand, right? Or you can go in a completely different direction. But I would say, given that you want a totally different customer, free yourself up during the strategic part to not be so hooked on having to call it the same thing, right? And one simple example of this, quick show of hands, if you had a choice at a party tonight between St. Pauli Girl or Beck's Light to serve your friends, how many people would serve Pauli Girl? Raise your hand. And how many of you would serve Beck's Light? And how many are afraid to raise your hand? I'm working with you here, guys, and you're not helping me. It turns out that St. Pauli Girl and Beck's Light are exactly the same beer made in the same brewery on the same assembly line, and they just have a different label on a different bottle. Now, there's a good reason for that. That's not deceptive. The fact is that beer, like most things, has a placebo element to it, and you feel differently when someone hands you a Beck's Light than when someone hands you a Pauli Girl. Well, the same thing is going to be true here. You may benefit by calling them the same thing, the same way Apple benefits when they call a phone the same brand name as a computer, but you might not, which is why Procter & Gamble makes 50 different things, Tide and Crest and everything in between, because it's better for the consumer to hear a different story. Other things that you're wrestling with that are keeping you from dominating the world. Yes, please.
My name is Celine, and I have a small business called Slow Factory where I print NASA images on silk scarves, and I'm still very, very small, so I'm freelancer, and I have another business that I do user experience design for other companies to fund this idea of mine. It's a year old. We launched on the same day NASA went to launch Curiosity to Mars, just like a coincidence. And I'm very small, and I don't know how to grow with a product that's based on Creative Commons licenses that's CC BY, which means everybody could use it. And I'm a very big advocate of Creative Commons.
Sure.
I've worked with Creative Commons for several years, and that's why I also started this. And a fashion element that's so ephemeral and based on trends, and I don't want to be based on trends. I want to be based on timeless and and I have this idea that people should wrap themselves with the universe and stop killing each other. So how do I
love that. That's
how do I grow, because I am
so
alone?
Let me ask you some questions. This is a beautiful project.
Okay.
Your customer, do you want your customer to buy one thing from you and nothing ever again, or do you want them to be a collector and go deep?
Collector.
Okay. So that, as you can imagine, is a totally different marketing strategy than if you want lots of people to own one. So the goal then is to say, what story does the collector tell herself, right, that turns her into someone who can't stop collecting? You don't sell functional scarves, even though they are functional. Mm-hmm. You sell the story the person tells themselves and maybe their friends, the same way the person who has 8 Keith Haring pictures or collects Banksy tells themselves a story. They don't need more stuff to put on the wall. The act of buying it and adding to the collection and being part of your tribe is important, right?
Right.
The next question is, does the person who's wearing your scarf want other people to notice it and ask about it? If so, you need to design the scarf in a way that makes it more ask-aboutable, right? So the scarf you're wearing is beautiful. Is that one of yours?
Yes, that is.
The thing about this scarf, though it's beautiful, is it's hard for me to imagine that many people would stop you, not when you're holding it up, but when it's around your neck, and say, where'd you get that? Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't scream, ask me where I got this. Do you see the distinction?
Yeah.
So built into your marketing strategy is a flaw, which is that your best customers aren't going to be invited to talk about it the way they might be if they had a Banksy on the wall, right? Or if you think about the ringtone. All of us have a ringtone on our phone now. That's brand new. It's only 15, 12 years old. When we didn't have ringtones, the first person who had a ringtone sold everyone else on ringtones, because the first time it rang during a meeting, you said, what's that? And you have a conversation about ringtones. So this is a challenge here, which is, how do I get people to want to talk about it? So there's a company in Mamaroneck, New York, that makes socks for 12-year-old girls. Now, they don't make them for all 12-year-old girls. They just make them for 12-year-old girls with a fashion problem. And their fashion problem is they don't have enough to talk about during recess, because their mom won't buy them a new outfit every day. Mm-hmm. So this company, Little Mismatch, makes socks that don't match. And you don't get 2 socks, you get 3 socks. And so these girls go to school and they say to their friends, want to see my socks? Right? Because they don't match. And then the girls go home and they say to their mom, I need new socks. And last year they did $40 million in revenue, selling socks that don't match to 12-year-old girls. And that's because they built into the product the conversation. Now, you may not want to do that because you're an artist. And you may say, no, I don't want to make scarves that demand attention, which is fine. But then you've also opted out of the curve of people talking about it. Right. Now, there are other ways you can give people an opportunity to talk about it, right? So you can say, not that I need him to ask you about your scarf, but I'm going to build something into my story that gets you to tell him about your scarf. That someone who's wearing the scarf cares enough about the story, they're going to say, do you want to see my scarf? And that, again, is your choice. How do you create that story? So what I'm getting at is, congratulations on doing the really hard work of being in the scarf business, but now you need to do the even harder work of being in the story business.
Okay? Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Julian Boxenbaum, and first, I like your jacket. Very nice.
Thank you. I wore it for Brooklyn.
You fit. I'm a product designer, and I'm working on a product that requires about $250,000 in development. So, of course, I don't have that. I need to go and get investment. And I've spoken to a lot of people about how you value a potential product, and whether you do it from the top down or bottom up and all that.
Right.
I mean, you know where this question's going.
Sure.
So in your experience, how do you do that, and how do you approach someone so that you don't have to give away the whole thing
Correct.
Before you have something developed?
Love it. All right, so this is the opposite of the question we started with, which is, all right, I so believe in what I'm doing, and there's no way to bootstrap it. I'm going to raise money. So now the next question is, from whom? From professional investors or from amateur investors? They're totally different people investing for totally different reasons. So almost all Broadway shows are funded by amateur investors. And the amateur investor doesn't take out a pencil and look at your spreadsheet and say, wait, your orchestra seats, blah, 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 there for your show. They just say, you mean I get to come to opening night and it's only $15,000 and I get blah, 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 and I get the Tony Award if we win? I'm in, right? That's the story that the investor tells themselves. If you go down the street to Fred Wilson, who's invested in Twitter and everything else, including my company a long time ago, Fred won't invest in your company, even if the valuation is $1. He can't, because he's a professional investor who has to answer to a whole bunch of other people and tell a professional investor story about something. So that's the first fork in the road. And generally, if you structure it right, for most people in this room, amateur investors are a much better idea, because you can deliver on the promise of this is going to be interesting, right? You can't necessarily deliver on the promise of we're going to go public. Because the thing you have to understand is the minute someone invests in your company, they are counting the days until you sell it. Because that's the only way they get a win if they're a professional investor. So the day you take $1 is the day you've pre-sold your company. And that is really stressful for someone like me. I don't know about you. All right. So now, it doesn't sound like I'm answering your valuation question, but I have. Because the valuation is just a story. It's not the truth. No one knows what your company is worth. And so when a certain kind of amateur investor shows up, these are the tumblers, the bullies, the people who have to feel like they win, they want your valuation to be as low as possible. They want the biggest percentage ship owners they can, and they're going to be a living hell. Right? So the minute the valuation conversation comes up with that person, you will know. And you shouldn't let that person invest in your company because they're taking over your life. On the other hand, there are other people who want to ask you 50 more questions about where you're growing and where you're going and what this matters. And then at the end, they say, all right, how do we divide this up? That is a much better conversation. Now, if you're not building your business to sell it, giving them straight equity isn't the way to do it. You can give them debt and equity. So you can say to somebody, all right, here's the deal. This device I'm making, right, is going to have a profit of $6 on every one we sell. Once we sold the first 1,000, we make $6 on every one. I will give you $5 for every one I sell until I've sold 10,000 of them. So you're going to get back all your money just from the first 10,000. And now the person says, wow, I don't have to trust this person. All I have to do is see how many they sold. He owes me $5 for every one. You won't make any money until after he's got every penny back. That seems really fair for both sides. At that point, you're going to give him $2 for every one, and then in the long run, 20 cents for every one. So he doesn't own any of your company. He owns a piece of your product. Now, if you're talking to an investor and they say, I refuse to do that, I want a board seat and I want to be your partner, you've got to say, do I want a partner? And if the answer is no, go find someone who likes that deal better. But right now, you are in charge to the extent of how much of your life do you want to sell to a stranger. And what you may discover is you don't have enough of a track record to do the kind of deal you want. At that point, you should make a choice. Do the deal you don't want and give away a couple years of your life, or change your strategy, your product, your business model, so you don't have to give away part of your life. And that is the mindset that I've adopted for the last whole bunch of years, which is I wouldn't have any trouble raising money from professional investors tomorrow. But I don't want to make that promise with my brand to those people and invite them into the hard strategy decisions I love to make. So instead, I have to do business differently, which means certain projects are off the table and certain upsides are off the table. But that's not why you're here. If you wanted to have upside, you go work for Goldman Sachs. So do the thing that permits you to do your work as opposed to playing a game that isn't your game. Yeah, you better go figure out what your manufacturing costs are. I mean, that's easy, right? There are a whole bunch of things that are easy to find out now. One of the things that's easy to find out is how much does it cost to make something in the small. Maybe not at full scale if it's a speculative thing, but it's pretty easy today, to find out how much does it cost to print a 17-pound, 800-page book. I sent 20 emails, and the next day I knew how much it cost. Yours is way more complicated. I get that. Right? But if it's so complicated that you have to raise money just to find out if there's a project here, you really need a deep-pocketed patron not an investor, right? And there are plenty of patrons out there because the kind of projects most of you are working on are relatively cheap as far as patronage goes. It's not like the Impossible Project with film. We're not talking about tens of millions of dollars to find out if there's even something there. And that's to your advantage. Take advantage of the fact that you are lightweight in the way you can work through the world. That's an advantage you have over giant companies.
Hi, my name is Susan. I'm the founder of Behold. We make tech accessories through 3D printing. My question is, we just passed our 6-month mark, so we've had to learn a lot in these first few months and actually change strategies a few times. And so it's natural to broaden and narrow, focus again, and broaden to learn and narrow again, especially in the new industry. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on, advice there.
Well, it sounds like you have completely nailed where you are. That you start by figuring out who is it resonating with. You take an idea to the world, figure out where it resonates, and then you realize you're going to have to do a lot of pushing to get it forward, so you're going to have to go narrow. And I think that's a mistake a lot of entrepreneurs with big ideas make, is they say, I want to make a social network for the world. Well, but if you made a social network for veterinarians, the chances of success go way up because you can make it right for the people you're trying to make it for. And I guess the best thing I could tell you in 1 minute of free advice is the more time you spend with the people who will be most delighted by what you make, the smarter you're going to be about where to push, right? That it's easy to say, the customers are over there. But, if you want to make something for coffee shops, go work at a Starbucks. And if you want to make something for people who are doing 3D printing, go sit there's a place in Boston, 3D printing place. Go sit there all day for a week and watch people and talk to people. And as you do that, you're going to find the spark that says, if I only had that. And that's what we're looking for. The two things that make it worth doing what you guys are doing for a living are, one, you get control over what you do all day, which is why I'm so worried about big investors. And two, you get a chance to delight your customers. You're not a cog in a system making average products for average people. You're making something that people are delighted by. And that gets you out of bed in the morning. So given how many choices you have, I would keep coming back to those two things, right? Will this give us the freedom to do the work we love to do? And if we make it, will it delight the people we're trying to make it for? Because if you say you're making a product for everyone, you're making a product for no one.
So I got into business because I like working by myself. And I have to grow now and add people. And I'm nervous about doing that because I don't know if I have those qualities to do it. So is there ever an option to have an entirely outsourced company? And besides the cost of it, is it beneficial or less beneficial?
Why do you have to grow?
Money.
I'm sorry, what?
I want more money.
You want more money? Okay. That's fair. That's fair. So there was a scholarly paper written 50 or so years ago, maybe 100, called The Theory of the Firm. And in it, they proved that people working together, because of trust and other things, can make a product cheaper and better than just blind relationships in the marketplace. And that is one of the reasons why companies have 10,000 or 100,000 employees now. A lot of that has changed in just the last 5 or 10 years. That it is really straightforward now to hire a virtual assistant who works 4 to 10 hours a day for you, not in your country, anywhere, doing all the things that you can do. If you can write down the steps, it can get done cheaper than you can do it. And then the challenge is, how far can one take it? So I will tell you that I have no employees whatsoever. And Squidoo is a different thing in that I work on, that their headquarters are in Virginia. But everything that you've seen me create, I don't have anybody who works for me as an employee who does that. And it's easier than ever to do it. Now, what you have to do, if you choose to go down that path, is surrender that magic thing that comes from a few people sitting in the office face-to-face, crossing bridges and putting out fires because they have that relationship, right? But it sounds like you know yourself well enough that that's not what you want. So if you're going to do this other thing where you're outsourcing each key component, the hard part is this. You have to be extraordinarily precise in what you want and when you want it by. So what we did a few years ago, we got a huge private label deal at Squidoo. And I said, here's the deal. We all like each other very much. We're sitting around this table. There's a lot of money on the table. From now on, we will not talk again on the telephone, and we will not meet again in person. We will build what is on this spec, and you can make any changes you want using this structure in Basecamp. And if it's in Basecamp, we will put a date on it, and we will make the change. But there will be no intuitive backing and forthing, because it just adds time and money. And as a result, we finished 2 months ahead of schedule, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do, because we forced everyone to avoid the shortcut of, oh, you know what I mean, and just used a piece of software, in this case Basecamp, that is organized around that. I think there's a whole bunch of businesses that could be run on Basecamp with you sitting on a beach in Fiji or something, typing in instructions. As long as you're adding enough value, you will be able to pay the people who work on it and pay them fairly, and they don't have to be in your face. That's my take anyway.
So I have a photography-related product, a physical product, and then it's also tied to potentially an app and a website, and that's just the general overview. But so I have a lot. I've realized I'm also pretty early on in the stage. I have a designer creating sketches and 3D models of the actual physical product, and I've told a lot of my inner network about the idea, and they're all very excited. Generally, the response has been very positive. So the challenge has been I don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. You know, I'm struggling with trying to build a team of people and what I'm promising them in the future, and you know, fitting these very talented, smart friends basically that I have into the project.
Yeah. Well, I want to step back a couple steps, which is there is almost no such thing as a great idea that takes care of itself. There is a huge number of great ideas in the world, and almost all of them do not meet their expectations in the market. The hard part for you is going to be finding strangers who pay money for this thing. And that is the hard part for almost everybody. Right now, there's a whole bunch of people who have nothing to lose by being enthusiastic and maybe could get a gig by being enthusiastic. So part of what it means to be the founder and the entrepreneur is to be able to find not the person who's applauding you, but the generous skeptic who wants to push back about the fact that, no, there actually aren't 400,000 people in the world who will pay you $20 the first day to buy this item. Let's figure out why that is. All right, so that said, I think this is your moment to whiteboard scenarios. Scenario planning was invented at Shell Oil 40 years ago. And the idea is, you know, they said, well, if there's a war in the Middle East, then what would happen? If they figure out that carbon is ruining the planet, then what would happen? And then you just come up with all these alternatives. So right now there are all these people who are eager to participate. And I think it's totally legitimate to say to someone who's eager to participate, all that's on the table is coffee. I understand if you don't want to work for coffee, but if you want to work for coffee, come on over. We're going to whiteboard some scenarios. And then you can sit with the PR person and say, well, what would be the, you know, how would we adjust the product to make Marie Claire like it? How do we adjust the product to make modern photography like it? And you talk through this scenario and that scenario. So what they're giving you is expertise. And what you're giving them is connection to forward motion, connection to a project that's on its way, with the understanding that as it gets bigger, maybe they can come on board. But I wouldn't pay people cash money at this point unless you have a very specific question that a very small number of people are able to answer. That's worth paying money for. But in general, in this connection economy in which we live, there are so many people who now understand the benefit of giving with their insight. You just have to be the smart guy who knows when to say no. And to say, no, that's not this. We do this.
My business partner and I are in the very early stages of the business. And we're just about to launch ourselves out there in the social media world. And I guess earlier on you talked about how you don't want to hit people over the head, right? And I know that I've been turned off on social media to multiple businesses because I have been overwhelmed.
Sure.
And I know a lot of businesses just use social media because they feel obligated to have it. So I guess, can you give us advice as far as the fine line?
It's a really easy answer for me. And I am an outlier here, and there are other people here who are masters of the Twitter social media domain. But here's my model. If they would miss you if you were gone, you have earned something of value. If they're tolerating you showing up, or you're just part of the stream, you haven't. So if I didn't send out my blog tomorrow, a few people would miss it, right? Whereas there are tons of people, if they didn't tweet tomorrow, no one would notice. There are all these corporations that send out email blasts, and if they forgot, we wouldn't call them up and say, where's your email blast, right? So that's the goal. Would they miss you if you were gone? So the last story I want to tell you as I wrap up is this. Art dealer goes to see Pablo Picasso, and he says, there are these paintings. People say, you painted them. And Picasso looks and says, nope, that's a fake. No, that's a fake. No, that's a fake. The guy leaves. And his assistant turns to him and says, Master, what are you talking about? I saw you paint that painting 3 months ago. And Pablo says, well, I often paint fakes. And one of the challenges you have is you're under a lot of pressure to fit in. You're under a lot of pressure to do it the way it's always been done. You're under a lot of pressure to paint fakes. I have no doubt that all of you are going to succeed. The real question is, are you going to matter? And I hope you will dig deep enough to confront that fear in the back of your head and go way out on the edge that you're almost at the edge of and do something that we would miss if you didn't. Good luck. Thanks a lot.